Does the food you eat have the ability to create or enhance symptoms of anxiety? 100%. So if you're someone who's willing to let go of a few things for a clearer mind and a calmer heart, then this video is for you. Hi, I'm Jess, I'm a clinical nutritionist, and today's video is all about the foods that you may want to experiment with avoiding if you're really looking to get your anxiety or even your panic attacks under control. Last week's video was on the foods to include for their anti-anxiety or calming effect, so I highly recommend that you check that video out if you haven't, because it's really the combination of these two videos, what to focus on and what to crowd out, that's gonna give you a really good foundation. So the following are the top 10 foods and essentially beverages that anyone with anxiety may strongly benefit from taking a closer look at. So let's get into it. The number one food or compound that you may want to drastically reduce in your diet is caffeine. Caffeine is a stimulant that increases heart rate, causes jitters, and essentially can lead to or trigger anxiety and even anxiety or panic attacks. Excessive intake has been shown to boost the risk of panic attacks, especially in those who are already susceptible to them, and particularly in adolescents as well. Caffeine hugely impacts our nervous system because it plays on our excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters glutamate and GABA. So caffeine directly increases the production of glutamate, our excitatory neurotransmitter, and inhibits the synthesis of GABA, which is our calm and let's be chill neurotransmitter. If you absolutely must consume caffeine, I really recommend trying something like green tea, because although it contains some caffeine, it also has the amino acid L-theanine, which naturally increases levels of GABA. So it's a little bit of a food anomaly in the sense that it may be something that can work for you better than coffee or other caffeine products. The next beverage that you may want to eliminate, and just to let you know, the next several of these are actually beverages as opposed to foods, is alcohol. We often think of alcohol as a depressant, and while it is, it's absolutely a trigger for anxiety and panic attacks in many individuals. While it's a depressant that can slow down the nervous system when we first have it, or if we're having it in small amounts, it actually has the opposite effect when people overdrink, and I say overdrink in quotations because that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be binge drinking. It can just be something that was a little bit too much for your nervous system. So essentially, when we are consuming alcohol on a regular basis or have more than normal on one occasion, it actually depletes levels of GABA. This causes changes in brain chemistry and can lead to a hyperarousal that's gonna be a contributing factor to those anxiety symptoms. If you actually Google like alcohol and panic attacks, it's a very common phenomenon that people experience. When I was actually in my early 20s, when I used to get anxiety and panic attacks quite frequently, it was always after a night when I had alcohol with my friends. So it wasn't directly upon drinking it. For me, it was always actually the next day where this really impacted me. Now, there was a lot of reasons why I was much more sensitive to alcohol in my early 20s than I am now, but that being said, some people are generally just more sensitive to the impact that alcohol has on their nervous system and their brain chemistry. A side note on number one and number two is that you definitely want to avoid a combination of alcohol and caffeine. This can be very dangerous. If you're in your 30s like me, then maybe you remember a product called Four Loko, which around 2010 was actually banned in several states because some college kids had some pretty adverse side effects from it, and one person even died. I didn't know this, it actually is back on the market, but they removed the caffeine and some other compounds in it that likely in combination with the alcohol was contributing to those really detrimental effects. I was around that age, I had a few sips of those, like not even a half or a quarter of a one, and I felt like I was gonna die. So it's certainly something that can definitely heighten a lot of those symptoms, and it's a combination that you're definitely gonna wanna avoid. All right, number 3 on the list of foods to avoid for anxiety is sugar. Basically, foods high in sugar and refined carbohydrates are gonna lead to an unbalanced blood sugar, so it's gonna lead to a spike in our blood sugar and then a crash. And this is a very common cause of feelings of anxiety, jitteriness. So the more processed sugars you can eliminate from your diet, the better you'll likely feel in this realm. Number 4 is actually fruit juice. And fruit juice can be just as detrimental as processed sugar in terms of messing with our blood sugar stability, because when we juice something, what we're doing is essentially removing the fiber, and the fiber is what helps slow the release of sugar in the blood. Fructose actually skips some steps in glycolysis. So essentially, when we're having just fructose on its own, it can cause a lot of mood instability. The 5th food or beverage on the list is a combination of some of these things that we're trying to avoid. So sugar and caffeine, another very dangerous combination. So we definitely want to avoid soda. Sugar and caffeine are going to drastically throw off our blood sugar and can contribute to overall stimulation of the neurotransmitters, as well as increased cortisol production, which are our stress hormones that are going to cause more anxiety. So if you're still having soda from time to time, I may recommend exploring a variety of alternatives that are out there today, like sparkling water or even things like Zevias, which are essentially carbonated beverages sweetened with stevia. Now, if you're thinking, well, then maybe I'll have a Diet Coke and avoid the sugar, number 6 is actually artificial sweeteners. Some people view artificial sweeteners as healthier alternatives to added sugar or fructose because they contain fewer calories and they could be more appealing to people if they are trying to lose weight. However, people should be aware that artificial sweeteners really do have the ability to impact your mood. Artificial sweeteners have been associated with many neuropsychiatric disorders, and aspartame in particular has been linked to behavioral and cognitive problems. Aspartame contains compounds that essentially inhibits the synthesis of and release of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, which play a prominent role in mood regulation. It also acts as a chemical stressor by increasing cortisol and produces excess free radicals, which can damage healthy cells in the body, and this is one of the reasons why it's been linked to cancer. So it has many negative effects on brain health. I honestly don't know what I would choose if I had to between regular soda and diet soda. I've actually played this version of like Would You Rather with a few of my friends. We all have different opinions and it's really hard for me. Like blood sugar instability where I'm probably gonna end up in tears a few hours later, or neurotoxins with links to cancer. There's really no good choice here. It would probably come down to whichever I would be able to handle more in the short term, but ultimately, I'm not someone who finds the need to do that experiment. So since we're on a drink and beverage rally, number 7 is one that I really wanted to include in this list because it's not something that a lot of people think about, and this is actually like vitamin drinks. And there are so many brands of these days. I'm not just talking about your traditional like Gatorade or vitamin water, but I'll essentially go to the store, and even in like a health food store, I will look at the different cool drinks that they have, pick one up, a lot of the times look at the back and instantly put it down, because what's happening with a lot of these drinks is not only do a lot of the times they contain like more caffeine and more sugar, but even if they're free from those things, they will likely contain an abundance of B vitamins. Because it's a drink, they're gonna use very cheap B vitamins that aren't bioavailable, and these forms of B vitamins may actually make people's anxiety worse. And I would rather just stick with a regular electrolyte powder. Even sometimes I'll pick up like an electrolyte drink or powder mix, and if it has B vitamins, I put it back. And just to be clear, I'm a huge fan of B vitamins. It's just that when you have sensitive neurochemistry, you have to be kind of particular about which forms of those vitamins you use. Now that we've gone through pretty much most of the drinks I can think about that may contribute to anxiety, I'm gonna move on to the first group of foods, number 8 essentially being processed foods in general. And this is because they're gonna contain several compounds that could be separate numbers on their own, but they're gonna be combined into one in this circumstance. Basically, a lot of processed foods contain artificial preservatives, additives, whether that's like nitrates, MSG, dyes, and all of these things can really be huge triggers for people's anxiety. I will do a separate video at some point on neurotoxins like MSG, but just know that it's generally processed foods where these things are gonna just sneak in without people even realizing it. And this will ultimately make you be like, why do I feel like I'm so addicted to this Hidden Valley ranch powdered crap, and yet also I feel horrible afterwards? And that is because things like MSG have the ability to essentially make us want to keep eating a food even though it physically makes us feel awful. The last two foods on the list, number 9 and number 10, are the top foods that are common food sensitivities for people. So that's gluten and that's dairy. If you haven't watched my video on food sensitivities, I will link it above here. And just know that when you have food sensitivities, this has the ability to drastically impact your mood and increase your levels of anxiety. So these are the most common food sensitivities that not only cause gastrointestinal discomfort, but because of the gut-brain axis, ultimately affect our mental health as well. So maybe you already know that you're sensitive to this food, maybe you're unsure, but gluten, for example, has actually been linked to neuropsychiatric disorders like schizophrenia, and there's some studies that even recommend that before admitting people to certain mental health facilities, that they should be screening people for celiac disease. So those are the top 10 foods and beverages that if you're really hoping to get a control on your anxiety or panic attacks, you may want to experiment with significantly reducing or completely eliminating. And now that you know which foods to avoid for anxiety, I highly recommend checking out this video here. That's going to be about the top 10 foods that if you actually eat more of, may help get into that calming state and ultimately reduce those anxiety symptoms. So I'll see you in that one.